For more on this, we're joined by Professor Tim Luckhurst, Principal of South College, Durham University. Tim, you are also a former BBC exec. What do you make of the way that this whole case has been handled by them?
Well, I don't think that the BBC handled the initial complaint absolutely perfectly. It took a little while to reach senior figures. But in the final analysis, the BBC probably doesn't know precisely what the relationship between Huw Edwards and this 17-year-old boy was. After all, it was a secret, and that secret was breached when the Sun reported what the young man's parents had said to the Sun about the relationship. Whether the BBC has ever had the details of that relationship, I don't know, and only Huw Edwards and the BBC can possibly know the answer to that. My assumption would be that Huw Edwards has had good legal advice from the very beginning, and that the BBC may not have full details. It might know what the parents have said, but then the young person concerned denies that what his parents are complaining about ever happened.
Well, the BBC have said everyone can move on, but clearly the family cannot move on. They complained, they followed the correct processes, and the BBC ignored them, which is why they then had to go down other avenues in order to get attention on the accusations. So for the family involved in this, they are now not going to get any closure because presumably Huw will be able to say, my mental health is suffering and I've been medically advised to stand down. So the BBC will now say, hands off Huw.
Well, I think as a father of 4 adult children myself, I would recognise that this is really a family problem rather than a legal one. Nobody's suggesting that anything illegal has happened at any stage. Therefore, there is no criminal investigation. The police will not be involved and never have been. The BBC were never going to investigate a criminal offence. They would have investigated breaches of the BBC's terms and conditions of employment, but they wouldn't have investigated a criminal offence. I have every sympathy for the parents, but I don't think there is a simple answer to this. Nobody's going to come forward with answers if their son is not prepared to tell them himself precisely what happened. If that isn't the case, there isn't a solution. And whilst it may be a very easy way to have a good kick at the BBC, I suspect that that's not going to give any of the answers that they require and never could. Disappointing and upsetting as that may be, that's simply the legal and practical reality.
But it's not just this one incident. There are other accusations made by other employees of the BBC against Huw Edwards' behaviour. So what it amounts to really, you're right, nothing illegal, there's no laws broken, but what we have is a person in a very privileged high position of power, which is paid for by us, the taxpayer, and that needs to be at least investigated.
It can't be investigated by the BBC. They no longer employ him, and there's no criminal case, so there will not be an investigation. You're asking for the impossible. Huw Edwards, you describe as privileged. Huw Edwards, with whom I briefly worked when I was at the BBC at the Today programme, is an extremely talented man who came from a not wealthy background and made a fantastic career as one of the BBC's premium broadcasters. It's only very recently that he was presenting the BBC's coverage of the King's coronation and the Queen's death. He was a hugely effective, hugely popular figure in the BBC. He was a great professional. Yes, something has gone very badly wrong in Huw Edwards' life. Something has gone very badly wrong for his career because he's now no longer employed by the BBC. But let's be absolutely clear about this. The BBC and Huw Edwards have parted company. He's been paid no compensation. I imagine he's got a very good BBC pension, but that's his entitlement. The BBC has no power to investigate him. The police have made it absolutely plain that no criminal allegation has ever been made. There isn't going to be an investigation, and it doesn't matter how much one tries to find a way into that, there's not going to be an investigation. It's that simple.
But the only reason BBC will not be able to conduct an investigation into accusations against one of their former employees is because that employee has resigned. In normal circumstances, that should not be the case. If an accusation is levelled against me, the company I work for should be able to at least interview me and ask me for my side of the story. With Huw, that was never allowed to happen because instantly, as soon as the accusations were made public, he then said he had mental health issues and he was signed off. And now he's resigned, so justice internally at least, there can be no justice internally. I'm not talking about legal proceedings, I just mean for the fact of investigating and seeing from the BBC's point of view, as an employer, what your employees have been accused of.
I don't think there are any circumstances in which the BBC would have investigated Huw Edwards' private conduct beyond his professional duties to the BBC. Even if he'd been a BBC employee, his private life, his sex life, if you like, is no business of the BBC's, particularly if that personal relationship is one with someone who, in the law's terms, he's entitled to have such a relationship. Now, let me be absolutely clear. I have got absolutely no idea what the nature of the relationship between Huw Edwards and this 17-year-old person was. I don't even know if there was such a relationship. But if there had been, it would have been no business of his employer any more than it's a business of the law. The BBC would certainly have investigated Huw Edwards while he was working for them if he'd done something to bring the BBC into disrepute, if he'd breached his duties as a journalist, if he'd done something which was deliberately intended or had inadvertently embarrassed the corporation.
Tim,
he no longer works there. It's not there. It doesn't happen.
Tim, I understand exactly what you're saying, but you're missing the point. The fact is, once this accusation was made public, other members of the BBC, other young workers at the BBC came forward and made complaints. The whistle was blown, other complaints were made about his behaviour towards other people working at the corporation. That should be investigated by the BBC. That should be investigated. How can that not be investigated by the company?
It's a corporation, not a company. We don't know what those allegations were in any detail. I don't know. You don't know either. We don't know what the BBC may have done to check on whether there was any truth behind those allegations. We don't know whether the BBC did more than than you think it's done. The simple truth is that this relationship between Huw Edwards and the BBC is over. Any hope for the sort of investigation which the family might perfectly understandably want to have is dead. It's over. The only way that the family are going to find out what happened is by reconciling themselves with their son and having a candid conversation. I'm not going to pretend that I think that's easy. I think it must be absolutely agonizing for them. But all sorts of assumptions can be made about the BBC's conduct. In fact, you have no idea how seriously the BBC took allegations by its own employees. You probably do, however, I'm sure you do understand that quite often people make allegations against their employer or against senior staff in an employer which may not be entirely true and which may be self-interested. Again, I don't know, but these things have to be judged carefully, with sobriety and with great care. There's no way that this is going to happen now. It is over, and it's a great way to find a stick with which to beat the BBC. But in the final analysis, the BBC's accustomed to that. It has sought to do its best to end what has been a difficult period. It's clear that lawyers have been involved on both sides. The head of News's statement ending Huw Edwards' relationship with the BBC was 55 words long and said absolutely nothing thanking him for his service or about anything else that he'd done for the BBC. It was the sort of statement which is written by a lawyer, very carefully checked, and then put into the public domain. The BBC's not going to do much more about this, and I think we're going to have to just get used to that and live with it.
OK. Tim Luckhurst, thank you for your time.